While it is true that the rules of Dungeons & Dragons are very flexible and entirely optional sometimes, there are still some mistakes that new Dungeon Masters can make when they begin running games. I have made several of these myself at one point or another, and in this video I have taken what I've learned, and my goal is to help new DMs either avoid those mistakes or feel better about making them, because making mistakes is how you learn. Before we get too far into it though, I do want to tell you guys about a new Dungeons & Dragons podcast called Beyond the Tavern Wall. The hosts aim to break down stereotypes surrounding the game and to bring to light how easy, normal, and fun it is to play Dungeons & Dragons. This podcast is a must for new players, and even experienced players like myself will gain some new insight when they listen to it. My friend Brendan Figgins created this podcast with his D&D group, and listening to what they have to say is genuinely entertaining and informative. Check it out on Spotify, a link is in the description of this video. Okay, back to making mistakes. For a first-time Dungeon Master, the rules in the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guides, and the Monster Manual can be completely overwhelming. It's easy to look at it all and think it is super complicated, and that can be very demoralizing. You might think you have to know all the ins and outs of all the rules in these handbooks to start playing. You don't. Fortunately, there is a set of basic rules you can find on D&D Beyond in any of the starter sets they have, and you can also find it online and download a free PDF of these rules. These basic rules are a condensed version of the 3 main source books, and it's a lot easier to digest. Besides the rules themselves, you might get really nervous when you're about to sit down and run a game, even if it's with friends, and even if it's like the third time you're running that game. You'll probably get butterflies in your stomach right up until the session begins. That nervousness could be anything. It could be because you're worried about messing up voices, messing up some characters, messing up the storyline, or worrying your mind's going to go blank when you're trying to set the scene. And that is all normal. I recommend keeping some notes to help you keep track of what's happening in the game and what you want to have happen for that session. And honestly, the best way to avoid overthinking is to take time to prepare for that session beforehand. Have a plan. Also realize that plan might change based on the decisions your player characters make during that session. And that's okay too. Truthfully, you're discovering the story of the game just as much as your players are in real time, so just play. You may have heard of this thing called the Matt Mercer effect, and what you have to know about it is that it's bogus, and Matt Mercer is not the golden standard for Dungeon Masters. Critical Role is staged by professionals who, between all of them, have decades of storytelling and acting experience. You may suffer from imposter syndrome if you've watched Matt or other professional DMs, and you feel like you're nothing like them. And you're right, you're nothing like them, and you never will be. And that is okay. You're an individual with your own brain and your own ideas and your own unique way of running Dungeons & Dragons at your table. Honestly, your players will be grateful you're willing to DM for them in the first place. Be yourself. You will have way more fun, and your players will also have way more fun that way. If you want to aspire to have similar skills to prominent DMs, then go for it. But do it your way. You should know, the challenge rating system in the Dungeon Master's Guide doesn't really work. It's a good starting point, but it may happen that your players survive a hard encounter with dozens of goblins just fine, and then in the next session they get totally wrecked by a single banshee. And that happens to the best of us. Of course, you may wonder what happened. There are 2 things, really. First, your players had extremely bad luck rolling dice during combat. Second, you either overestimated your player's combat ability, or you underestimated the monster, which I guess are effectively the same thing. And full disclosure, we've all done it. The challenge rating of a monster will give you a good idea of their power level, but if you want a better idea, take a look at their armor class and their hit points. Hobgoblins, for example, only have 11 hit points, but they have an armor class of 18, making them much more difficult to hit than your run-of-the-mill monster. They will probably drop after a couple of hits, but they're difficult to hit in the first place because that 18 is a pretty high roll. On the other end, owlbears have an armor class of 13, but they have 59 plus hit points. It's much easier to hit them, but they have a lot more health that your players have to carve through. You also want to look at the monster's actions and abilities. Owlbears, for example, have the multi-attack feature, which means they can attack twice every single turn. An owlbear is only a challenge rating of 3, but if your players are only level 3, they could still get wiped out by a single owlbear. The trick is to get a feel for your players' abilities and their group playstyle during combat. Of course, even then, all players and monsters are at the mercy of the dice. Balancing encounters is not an exact science, but there are better ways of doing it, and I may cover that in a future video. Now, if you're worried that one of your encounters might TPK the party, then it's a good idea to just throw in an extra NPC that is their ally to give them extra hit points and extra attacks. This NPC can focus on dishing out damage to the monsters, or they can be a support type and heal the players. And of course, their own hit points serve to absorb damage from the monsters as well. Congratulations, you made it this far through the video. Unfortunately for you, you run into a wild YouTuber. Roll for initiative. If you get higher, like the video. If I get higher, subscribe. Ah, nuts. It can be very tempting to give your players a lot of gold and that really cool magic item you read about in the Dungeon Master's Guide as a reward for clearing their first dungeon. I'm telling you, don't do it. Or, don't do it too often. Lots of gold and amazing magic items will feel sweeter to your players if they have to really fight for it. This kind of loot is big boss level reward stuff. Too much gold will make shopping, which is a very popular and fun downtime activity in Dungeons & Dragons, ultimately pointless. Dungeons & Dragons is a role-playing game, not a video game. It's not about having tons of money to buy all the fancy magic items available in the game. Still, if the idea crosses your mind, ask your players what they think. They might have a really good time blasting through monsters and bosses with that super powerful magic item from level 1 all the way to level 20. And that could be fun. Just know that, in my experience, and more often than not, that fun becomes less and less rewarding, and can cause some players to lose interest in the game. I know I started this video by basically saying you don't have to know all the rules before you start playing, and that's true. The mistake here comes from breaking the rules, or rather, disregarding what the source material states, and changing the rules before you even know what the source material says. Yes, you can change the rules at your table to customize your gaming experience. What new DMs might not realize is that the rules are there because they make up years of what has been tried and true to Dungeons & Dragons as a role-playing game. Don't knock it till you try it, so to speak. But then, after you know the rules, if you think there's a better way to implement a certain game mechanic, do it. That's what makes this game great.